Hey, today we're exploring like the implications of how trauma impacts the body and steps that we could be taking to heal these deep emotional wounds to show up more fully present. I'm joined with Sunitha Sandeep, and welcome, Sunitha.
Hey Ben, thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. I think it's going to be like a very nice discussion, deep discussion. So looking forward to it.
Me too. So you had a sort of awakening, and as I have in my own ways, but let's start with you. Initially, well, you grew up in, I think you said Bangalore,
Yeah.
and then, and from what I've heard from other conversations you've had, that you had excelled professionally in the corporate world, and maybe share a few details about that. But then there was some traumatic events, even
Yeah.
surgical intervention that left your, I think it was your left arm.
Your left arm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I think from a personality standpoint, growing up in India, it was more of a, you just achieve success is what you're taught. That'll give you happiness. And that's you at some point of time you make that as your identity. So academically I
mhm,
was pretty much like excelling academically. I have excelled professionally as well. And then I think somewhere that is the identity, that is who you are, like you
mhm,
become that more than doing certain things, you become that. um, and there was a lot of anxiety because whenever you are going after something that you really want, you get it, you walk through it, you become a workaholic, you do all of these. But then I think sometimes I feel that life has a way to steer you to the direction that it wants you to go, not the way that you want to go. And there was a I fell down and I had like a surgery. I had to go through a surgery, and there was some kind of a we can't I don't want to get too much details into the surgery. But then what happened was there was an error in the surgery, and then my left arm, the nerves were severely damaged.
mm,
And there was a 50-50%, like it can, it cannot, and I had to go through multiple surgeries. Nobody knew what's going to happen. And I think at this point in time is when you realize, oh my God, there's only so much you can do, right? There's only so much control I have in my life. Then there is a shift that happens. A shift that is like a very fierce grace, right? Like there is a very sweet grace that happens wherein you get in, and then you have revelations and you feel good about it. And then there are certain things that happen very fiercely in your life wherein you're not expecting that, and it just puts you into this place wherein there is nothing to hold anywhere. There
mm,
was no hope of my arms getting back. And for me, I come from this, oh, everything needs to be my way and I can control. If I put in more effort, if I put in a lot of willpower, I can get what I want, right? That's the mentality with which we grow up.
mhm,
And then when this happened for me, it was like a sudden burst. It was like a sudden pop out of that bubble. Oh, I can't do anything about it. I literally couldn't do anything about it, right? And it was a lot of went through clinical depression. I went through anxiety. Then my panic attacks started happening. It's like, what's going to happen to my life? And I was 26 years old at that point of time. I won't have a, like, what if I don't, like, if it never grows back, my nerves never grow back. Nobody knows what's going to happen. The doctors are not giving a yes or a no. It's a 50-50.
mm,
And I think that moment was when it was a complete surrender. It's like, I can't do this anymore. I can't i can't you know and I think that's when the identity gets shaken up a lot. The
yeah,
identity that was, because that was my biggest identity, that I am in control of life, I can do things, what I want to do, in a good way, like, do the right things, you get the right results. That identity was shaken. And then it was a complete surrender. And for the first time when that happened, it just felt like everything was okay. Like, oh my God, I can accept myself the way I am. even with all the imperfections. And that was a very big shift for me, because I wasn't that way at all. So whenever we have this sudden shifts in our perspectives, that was the revelation. And it was also not just a mental revelation of the surrender and acceptance. It was more of a body and a heart kind of an opening, that I can really accept myself the way I am. It's like a kind of opening. And it was just a glimpse. It just lasted probably for a few minutes, or maybe few hours, few days, on and off and so. And then within few days or weeks, I think after that, things started healing. And I started having like pins and needle sensation in my nerves. And it's like, oh, that is actually a very good sensation to have, especially when the nerves are growing. And then a lot of things changed. My career changed. The place where I lived, I had to shift to a different place. I got married to my husband. A lot of things suddenly shifted, which I never planned. And whatever I had planned went away. And whatever I did not plan, it was a complete surrender to wherever life was taking. And it took me wherever it needed to take me. And I was just going through it. I was helping it, but I was not trying to take it to any other place. And I think that was the first biggest change that happened. But I didn't understand much of it. I had done a little bit of Vipassana meditations during that time. And I forgot about it, and I got married and I had kids. And then I think it's when it started flaring up. And I think there was also a trauma that had gone through. There was an energetic, and usually I believe that once you have an energetic opening of whatever sort it is, it tries to clean up the pathways. It starts, the process has begun. Whether you like it or not, the process starts. It starts taking over. The first symptom I had was severe body pain.
That was after the injury and the surgery?
Yeah. After the surgery, everything got healed. Of course, it's not 100% healed yet. There will always be like, it will never like the original one. But it was 70-80% healed. And I started getting body pains in my neck, in my back pain, lower back, legs. I couldn't sleep. It was severe insomnia that I experienced for almost about many months, that I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't even sleep for like 5 minutes. Yeah. 5 minutes, and I couldn't sleep. It was a high energy, and I had to go. I remember I would go put my leg on the concrete, like I would walk barefoot, because I just felt so much energy. It was a natural way for me to just let go. Or being with animals helped me a lot. Like if I would just touch an animal, it just felt good. Like, I think it was high energy that was going on, which I didn't know at that point of time. And then I started working with a Buddhist teacher at that point of time. And he mentioned, oh, this could be something related to energetic kundalinis and so on. And I was scared about it. It's like, I know nothing about these stuff. And but then I think whatever he said started making more sense. And then same time, because I had so much pain, I started looking into the work of Dr. John Sarno. And by this time, I had done literally everything for the pain. I had done chiropractic treatments, acupuncture, acupressure, physical training, PT, and then herbal medicines, whatever, like anything and everything for both body pain and insomnia. Nothing helped. And that's when I started looking at Dr. John Sarno's teaching, and it's like, oh my God, there could be a link to this. And when I started doing whatever he mentioned, it really made a lot of sense. There was a lot of anger that was there. There was a lot of other emotional repression that was there. hurt, sadness, humiliation, grief, uh, anger, rage.
Mm.
It was just all stored in the body. And with Dr. Sarno's teaching, I think a lot of it started to mellow down a little bit, and then the energy started going up and down. And it slowly started in a way that, oh my God, okay, I can even live life now. I can continue to live. Otherwise, it was so bad that I did not know if I was going to survive for a long time with the way things were going on.
What are the specifics that he taught you as far as working with the emotions that were manifesting in your body at that time that were creating all these symptoms?
Yeah, small things like any small trigger that can happen in the life, anything. Um,
Mm.
then it would come into there would be, let's say if there is an anger stored there, right? And there is another part of me that says, no, you can't get angry at all. You
Yeah.
cannot get angry, right? There is an internal conflict that happens. The situation demands that I have to be angry for whatever reason, right or wrong. I think
Mm.
that's secondary, but their emotions are emotions. They need to be angry for a reason. There is another part of me that says, no, you can't be angry,
Mm.
right? There's a constant juggle between these two, and it's always the one that says you can't be angry that would win most of the times. And there would be certain spurts wherein I could get really angry or I could get really sad. Again, it's the same thing for whether it's sadness, feeling hurt, feeling vulnerable, feeling weak.
Mm.
My emotions were more on the feeling of vulnerable, feeling of being very weak, feeling of helplessness. Those were my hidden or suppressed emotions.
Okay.
Expressing anger, expressing power, expressing even myself. That was a natural. It was okay for me. I didn't have any issues there. For me, expressing any kind of vulnerability, weakness, helplessness, fear, I think those were the other set of emotions that I really had to do a lot of inquiry-based practices to know how to, like, it's layers of digging in, right? One is a layer of just, why am I behaving like this? What happens if I don't behave in this way? Or what happens? So it's like an inquiry that happens at one layer. Once that releases, something else opens up. And then
Okay.
again, it's more inquiry. Then again, more inquiry.
So inquiry. Now I have
Yeah.
several questions.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
and one thing I noticed too is like we have different kinds of uh, orientations and as far as like the way our bodies work, and also there are different cultural things.
Yeah.
But I notice the time that I've spent in India and Sri Lanka is that people's have their bodies tend to be more fluid, more malleable, and yet there's sometimes there could be this very strong cultural mindset, and I
Yeah.
see it more in some of the from families that are more where there's more success, you know, materially and in the career world when it comes to like, those who are in engineering and medicine and who are excelling, you know, in the tech world. And there's very strong mental expectation on one hand, the and some of that's projected, you know, by the
Yeah.
parents and it's adopted by the children.
Yeah.
But what I also see on the other hand too is that, and especially the difference comparing from my experience working in North America and Europe as well, that there's a much higher level of sensitivity among people of South Asian origin,
Yeah.
and their bodies will be much more fluid. So when there's this huge disconnect emotionally, like people can be so much in their head. And you see another example of this, like the casteism, which, you know, it's kind of a love-hate relationship. And that's probably the aspect that I of South Asian culture that really sickens me is the casteism. But there will be this disconnect where people can be so much in their heads.
Yeah.
And then I'll see these manifestations in people's bodies. But once, working with South Asian people, Indians, Sri Lankans,
Yeah.
Pakistanis as well,
Yeah.
once you get them connected with their emotional aspect and really processing their emotions, their bodies will be so much more fluid and will so much more malleable than and
have you seen a difference between non-South Asians with respect to how the emotional trauma works and emotional inquiry, the malleability aspect of it?
less malleable.
I see.
I find that there tends to be more armoring in the body, and it's just, for me, it's harder work. I have to work that much harder from my end.
I see.
And like times that I've spent in India and Sri Lanka both, there's, like, I was staying in this ashram at one point in Powai, which is a suburb of Mumbai. And so one individual I was working with, for instance, we do a session and he comes back and he's describing in great detail, like all this vivid range of physical sensations and all the emotions that were coming up, and how he was working through these core issues that he'd carried for decades. And I barely had to say much of anything other than just kind of affirm what he was. Whereas in the United States, a lot of times I feel like I'm having to connect the dots with people because
I see.
And then in Sri Lanka, I was staying with this family, and a lot of people are impoverished comparatively financially. So the father takes this fall. This crew, after working all day, show up after doing their day job, and they're working through the night. And the father falls, lands on concrete, and he's hurting quite a bit. And I wake up in the morning, and so we assembled the kitchen table in the room I was sleeping, put him on the table, and afterwards he's rolling back and forth on the table. He's prostrating at my feet. I say, "No, stop that. Get up, get up, get up. I'm just another person. I just worked to develop this gift." But he doesn't, hardly speaks any English, but he's saying, "Pain go, pain leave body." and then his daughter translates for him. But I don't see as great of a responsiveness in North America. It's a lot harder work. So as I listen to you, it's bringing me back to like the work I've done with a lot of people in South Asia. There's that sensitivity, and sometimes that could be quite a challenge because, where, forgive me if I'm veering off a little bit, but sometimes there's a certain narcissism that you'll see in South Asian culture where, and it's becoming less, but it's like, no, we don't care who you want to marry. We've selected this person for you. And I've had friends who've been pushed into marriages, arranged marriages and they end up having affairs, and it's a big mess. Sometimes it works out, and other times I've known people who've, for instance, went all the way through medical school, and you could see how they were just going against this deeper knowing, this deeper sense of themselves. And so, but you two being high achieving and maybe instilling some of this dynamic, of maybe your family was a little more accepting or understanding, but just the instilling of that, performance. I got to perform. I got to achieve. And
I think it's a lot from the overall culture and society as well, right? As a kid, if you do something good, if you get praised, if you get appreciated, unknowingly or knowingly, without the small child doesn't understand all of these things, right? We continue, it does something good, you appreciate it. You do again
Mhm.
something good, you appreciate more. You do more, and then they appreciate more, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a way of learning.
Right.
And I think a child can come from the same family, like with other siblings, and the siblings might turn out to be completely different from one
True.
child, right? So sometimes it's not always about how the parents, the culture, or the parents instill values or so. It also depends on the
Temperament of that individual.
safety mechanism, right? And I think for
Yeah.
me, coming from a trauma background, I think I always feel that anything we develop could be a safety mechanism. For me,
Yeah.
it was safe to perform, it was safe to achieve, because that was my identity. Anytime I wouldn't, it was not my identity, and it was not safety for me. Power,
Mm.
expressing myself was very safe for me, right?
Uh-huh.
But then there could be some, in the same kind of a family, there could be, with the same like instill values or so, there could be another person who is more of, it's easy for them to be vulnerable, it's easy for them because they feel safe there.
Yeah.
But then expression of power or expression of like leadership qualities could be very difficult for them, right? So I think it's the adaptation that we do somehow. I don't know what the child goes through to learn which way to select or so, but I think there is a lot to do with our safety mechanism and our personality. The personality becomes the safety wall for
Mhm.
what we are trying to guard against, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also, when they talk about family systems, and different children will take on specific roles.
Yeah.
And there's also like projection that goes from parent to child. And so often one or some children will succeed, whereas another child takes on more some of those just shadow aspects, or
Yeah.
some of the aspects of the self that the parent disowns or doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I see that enacted in different families.
Yeah. And again, as we mentioned, one person can take the shadow aspect of the parent that the parent disowns. The
Yeah.
other child can take the shadow of the shadow aspect that the parent really like holds, right?
Yeah.
There are two aspects. One set of values is what the parent literally holds, which is also a kind of suffering. That the
Mhm.
other side, other part of the value system is something that they hate, or they want to disown, and that's also a suffering. Anytime when there is
Mhm.
this concept of I want something and I want to hold it near me, or I don't want something and I want to push it out, I
Yeah.
think that's the suffering, and that is something the children get it. The children
Mhm.
can get it from parents, the children get it from teachers, their
Mhm.
friends, their whole society, their whole culture. And I think after doing the trauma work myself, and if I would just go back, before I was into like, I need to clear these shadows, I need to remove them, and so, but I think the more deeper I go now, to be very frank,
Mhm.
I don't know if we can literally clear off every shadow, every trauma, everything that is going on within us.
Mhm.
It's the deeper aspect has revealed that it's how conscious we become of those trauma aspects, those shadow aspects, those personality aspects, and not let it out, act unconsciously.
Yeah.
If, for example, anger, if expressed in an unconscious way, can lead to fights, wars, conflicts, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
when anger is expressed in a more conscious way, it can be more power. It can be more trust for others. Like, oh no, I can trust this person. It can be more ethical way of living life, right? And again, same thing on the vulnerability aspect. If vulnerability is just expressed unconsciously, it'll be more like just victim kind of a mentality. I just need attention. I just want this person to do more for me. Versus when vulnerability is expressed in a more conscious way, it changes to courage. It changes to resilience. It changes to grit, right? So, and I think that is what slowly I'm feeling is in the deeper part. We are the way we are. We can't change, but let's just be conscious about it and not let it take over us. That's all.
It's, wow, it amazes me that you're saying this right now, because in having grown up with a fair amount of physical and emotional abuse, getting it at home, and then on top of that, bullying at school, growing up in much of the time in Southeast Texas, a very it was a very toxic environment. But in any case, as I grew into my teens and 20s and my attempts to form intimate relationships, and when you suffer that kind of abuse in childhood, adolescence, you tend to form attachments to individuals who can also be themselves very wounded and wounding. And so and these profound attachment wounds and the grief, the pain, the devastation, the vulnerability that I experienced on my end. And so in my case, I just taught myself to dive into the depth of all those emotions, that pain. And I would go so far into its depth. And at a certain point, I would feel it just breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. And then there would be these powerful emanations of warmth glowing from within. But then there's, on one hand, doing this practice activates the body, mind's innate healing intelligence. Same healing intelligence that when you get a cut or bruise will heal that injury. But we come up against the limits of our body, mind's innate healing intelligence as well. I would hit the wall. And so, yes, I spent some time in psychotherapy, but I was gaining the intellectual understanding of my emotional wounding, but it still wasn't healing the actual trauma itself. And so in my mid-20s to early 30s, I had the opportunity to work with a few gifted healers. There are a few people working on this level anymore. And I could feel it beginning to dismantle those constructs within those configurations. But the fact that there were so few of them that I had the opportunity to work with, and I was just left suffering terribly because I needed a lot more intervention. Fortunately, having trained with a traditional Native American doctor, a big part of what he introduced me to, like when he would transmit portions of his own healing gifts, and I know being from India, you have some insight or understanding into these things. You know, you have the sadhus, some of the yogis, and there's a transmission that goes down a lineage. And so among Native Americans, the traditional doctors would choose an apprentice towards the end of their life, and they would take a portion or all of their gift or powers they possess, and they would transmit it to a younger apprentice. So my mentor doing that with me had me go, the vision quest, you typically fast for 4 days and nights with no food and water. And so it was during the vision quest, I missed some years in my 20s, but when I started going back, you know, at 31, there'd be times I'd be on the mountain and it'd be like a near-death experience, like portions of my life are flashing before my eyes. And these traumas, many of which I'd completely forgotten about, it's like, there it is again. I'm reliving it, all the emotions, all the vivid sensory impressions, you know, the whole interaction with those individuals. And I could feel it dismantling those traumas that were living within
Yeah.
me and building this whole new foundation. So
Yeah.
that's, and what I find is the vast majority of people, it's not even being aware. You know, there's such a profound lack of awareness across the board, regardless of culture. You know, most people, whether it's in South Asia or other parts of Asia, Europe, Africa, or Central South America, North America, it's the vast majority of people possess a limited awareness of these, of the emotional wounding, the trauma, and part of it is the fact that we're so resistant to allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and also the lack of acceptance, the lack of permission is a big part of it.
Yeah. Lack of permission, right?
Lack
Permission
of
to
permission.
ourselves. I think from working with others and of course on your own journey, I think there are probably two sects, right? One is sect of this whole journey. One is the sect of mysticism, which
Yeah.
is more visions, sometimes out of body experiences, sometimes near death experiences, and a lot will just surface. And if you can stay with those and not get completely swallowed by it, versus not trying to take a distance, just being presence, the
Yeah.
beingness or the being just present, a lot of it will dismantle. And that is what I have seen usually in the in the mystic culture of, like, you know, gurus or
Yeah.
transmission or deeper kundalini practices, the energetic, the shamanics, all of those traditions. That's what I have seen. And then there is the other sect of the journey, which is more a contemplative journey, the mystic journey and the contemplative journey. And I think more and more what I'm seeing is, because somewhere to go into the mystical part, there needs to be a lot of trust in the person who is doing it. You really need to trust your guru. You really need to trust your teacher, right? And that becomes the core foundation of any kind of transmission. On the mystic path or the mysticism path. On the contemplative path, if you see most of the teachers, it's not about transmission, it's about inquiry. Don't believe what I say, experiencing it yourself. Ask yourself the question. And sometimes, like Adyashanti, for me, my teacher, he comes more from a contemplative, or even Rupert Spira. For me, I think my markup is more into the contemplative. Do I get more on the mystical path? It happens on the journey. There is no avoidance of anything. Like, even if you're on the mystical path, there will be a lot of contemplative practices that you would anyway have to do. But I think it's just which side, what is our markup made of? How are we made that we usually get closer to one kind of a teaching? So for me, it has been more on the contemplative side, which is more inquiry, which is more about, why am I doing this? What is happening? What is contributing to this behavior of mine? Why am I feeling this way? And then the more and more, it's like an inquiry basis. You keep asking yourself the question. And initially, you ask questions between identities until you go so deep into the inquiry process that there is no option for the presence to come and talk. And then at that point of time is when the dismantling happens. And then awakening journey, how it has helped is establishing that presence, establishing that knowing, no matter what kind of traumatic things that are going to surface, right? Because it's not just trauma that you have gone through. The more deeper work we do, we realize there is family trauma, then there could be generational trauma, there could be cultural trauma, right? And there is trauma just as being a human trauma, right? There is a lot of these, especially when you go into those deeper awakenings, wherein it's a primordial fears that are talking to us at that level. what has helped is establishing who I am as a beingness, or a presence, or that consciousness. If that is not established, it's very difficult to go into the deeper aspects, because it's a very contemplative journey. There is nobody to trust other than me here, right? For me, the contemplative journeys were, I need to find the answers, and at some level the answer stops, and that's when you stop seeking. So the in-depth queries will take you to a place where presence just gets activated. Before, you had to forcefully try to be present, and then you look through the trauma, you understand the trauma, you open your heart to the emotions that are there, without any kind of expectations from it. Sometimes what happens is we want to release the trauma. We want to have the trauma and the emotional bindings get away from us, so we can feel free, right?
Yeah.
But with that intention, it never works. It's the emotions have to be just held. Like, I'm going to give you the space, you can stay. The fear has to be held. The deep emotions of vulnerability and helplessness, just holding it and asking it to be there for however long it wants to be, with no expectation for it to dissolve. And sometimes it stays there, and sometimes it dissolves, and sometimes it again stays there, and it comes on and off. And so at that point of time, this is where I'm going back to what I mentioned about the consciousness. Can I go in and literally clear and release every such emotional suppression that is held? Maybe some teachers have done it. But for me, it's an act of being conscious of it. And if that emotion needs to express, it will express. If it doesn't feel safe to express, it won't express. But the only difference is that emotion unconsciously shouldn't influence my life. Okay.
It's interesting, what I've noticed is, because I've worked with people of so many different spiritual traditions, and I've noticed some Buddhist teachers, for instance, and there would, on one hand, there was this process of, or practice of being present, and yet I could still see like some of the residual of traumas and emotions that were still held within the body. And my own experience was the trauma was so significant, so pervasive, that I didn't feel I could escape from it in any way. It was just always consuming or all over me, and just interfering with my ability to function.
Yeah.
And I noticed, like, I used to teach classes on a weekly basis in New York City and every other week in Boston. And there are times where people would be in my classes, and I could take them into the depth of the emotions. And it's something most of these individuals had never done before. And getting them deep into those emotions, they would be processing. There would be this release in the moment. And for instance, letting go of a very unhealthy attachment, more of a sense of resolution. But after the class, and I have this ability that I developed, I'd have people stand in front of me, and I would scan the body with my hands. I'd get like an internal picture of what I'm feeling through my hands. So two different senses operating simultaneously. And I could still see, like, what they call the chakras. I could feel like a lot of the damage or disfigurement within the chakras. I could feel how they fail to develop. I could see much deeper levels of emotional wounding that we had yet to touch.
Yeah.
And what I find is that in being present, and I feel like from my experience, what I've found
Yeah.
is that the extent of the trauma that I carried, I had to pull from multiple
Yeah.
resources. It's like, God, I'm so screwed up. I got to find whatever's going to work to undo this.
Yeah.
And so, on one hand, like I said, starting with the psychotherapy, but teaching myself to go into those emotions and be present. But what I also found, it's crucial to breathing. Yesterday, I was working with a woman, and I opened my eyes just to check in on her as she was doing practice, and the breath was very shallow and high in her chest. And I find it so crucial that for this healing intelligence to kick in and work, we need to breathe all the way down to the abdomen. We need to expand the rib
Relax.
cage.
Relax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there are aspects that I've noticed, where people would be, and this would frustrate me in class, like as well. I could take people in and just have them be present, but I'm still seeing a lot of this wounding,
Yeah.
this trauma lodged in their body, and
Yes.
a lot of this what I call infrastructure,
Yeah.
the chakras, layers of the aura, they fail to develop. And see the chakras, these layers of the aura. Okay, we have the brain, the gray matter in our
Yeah. Yes.
skull, but this other is like the, say, non-physical manifestation of the
Yes.
mind.
Yes.
And so when I look in the chakras and the aura, they reflect the person's range of motion, like their capabilities, what they can do. You have people who they're successful in business, they're leading a movement, and there's a lot of additional faculties than someone who's, say, low functioning. But what I find is that in so many instances where people can just, say, be present, and a lot of this distortion, this damage, doesn't get repaired on its own.
Yes.
And there's also, I noticed there's a tremendous amount of stagnation. Like, we go through these experiences, hardships, loss of a job, and overwhelming financial insecurity, people going through like a devastating divorce and the protracted battle with custody, the death of a parent or other loved ones. And what I find is a lot of people do not fully digest these lived experiences. And so there's a lot of residual. We're overwhelmed with the stress and those emotions. And so a lot of that doesn't fully process. And there's this backup, there's this residual that accumulates in the body. This is a big part of the reason I've relied on the Vision Quest. Going that 4 days and nights without food and water, I've gone dozens of times because I can feel that buildup. I do practice on a daily basis. And yet, despite the fact that I'm doing my own practice, I feel the buildup.
There's a build-up. There's a build-up. No, I think you hit on the right point. Presence can be used as a spiritual bypass. To not go into the deeper paths, right? On the contemplative path, we talk about suppressed emotions, and we also talk about repressed emotions. Suppressed emotions are you consciously make a decision, or you say like, okay, I cannot express anger, I cannot be sad, and you kind of hold it and you try not to express, right? That is more of a suppression. You just suppress. And if you're present of those suppressed emotions, you're conscious of it, you're okay. Like, okay, I don't have to release it now. I can just sit, or I can do whatever I need to release it slowly. That's the easy part. But I think there is a deeper part to it, which you mentioned, that there's a repressed part of it, which for me, again, I process it daily. And I use life to process rather than just sitting for me, if I just try to sit and then try to inquire, it doesn't show up that much. But then if I try to go into the life, and then when life tells me, oh, wherever I see there's a resistance to life, right? Then you know that there is a trigger, there is something. And then it's a kind of deep, how do I say this? You forget presence for a while. You forget spirituality, you forget presence, you forget awakening, everything. And you willingly become that identity that is frustrated, which is confused, which hates life, which is resistant to life, blah blah, whatever it is, which we don't think, oh, presence is all allowing, presence is all accepting, and I have to be present. Versus I willingly let go of that aspect, and I move and I consciously become this identity that maybe hates life, that has full of rage, that is extremely vulnerable. It's a kind of, how do I say this? It's a kind of willingly becoming, embodying that aspect of us, which we know is not something that we want, which is not present, which is not nice, which is, you willingly go into an aspect that doesn't feel good, that actually doesn't feel good. And you become that. It's not even looking at it from a distance. Like usually we see, when we say presence, we look at it, okay, I am present to this thing that is happening. I am present to this emotion that is good, bad, right, wrong, whatever, right? Versus, this is where the non-duality aspect comes in. Who I am willingly becomes this. And that for me happened more from an awakening, from the losing of the identity, right? Losing of the primordial fear of, sometimes the fear of death and so on. So then you can actually literally become that identity, and in a safe environment, kind of see what that identity has to talk, identity has to feel, identity has to sense, what kind of energy it has, in a very intuitive way, not in a more two people, I'm going to do this, you're going to answer, I'm going to ask this question, you're going to answer, versus this becomes one. And I trust it, that it's okay for it to enact however it wants to enact. And when it enacts, it can say all the wrong things. And again, this is done in a safe environment. It's not just done outside with people or so. Like in our practices, we do this.
Yeah.
You become that. It enacts whatever it wants to say. There will be rage sitting in there. There can be vulnerability. Usually, from what I have seen, usually the top part is the anger and frustration first. Then comes to anger, then comes to rage. Under rage is some kind of a fear, and under fear is the vulnerability. And the vulnerability, like the helplessness, vulnerability, and under that is the fear of getting hurt, fear of dying, or fear of not feeling safe. Everything just falls down to that level. It's slow progression of all our chakras to the deepest chakra, which is the fear of death, the fear of not existing, for more from an identity standpoint, right? And so when you become, for me what has helped is when I become that identity, and give it complete freedom to enact the way it wants to do, mentally, emotionally, and physically. It has to let go of the stored energy.
Yeah.
Because it's given the freedom to do whatever it wants to. And usually when we say trauma, when we have repressed emotions, there is this dense form of energy that is sitting in there, right? And that is what is causing us pain. That is what is causing us suffering. That's what's causing us the seeking mentality, that there needs to be something better, and I'm not happy with what it is. I want something better. And I think when you're given that identity to do whatever it wants to do willingly, it no longer feels the need to hold itself together and protect itself. It just relaxes. And for me, that I feel is the more surrendering part of it. You become that and it just surrenders. And it kind of gets absorbed into the wholeness of the energy. And I don't know if I'm explaining that right.
Yeah, you are. And there's two important elements in here as I'm listening to you, is that there's acceptance,
Yeah.
which is lacking with so many people. It's not being able to acknowledge and accept these parts of self. And there's also trust.
Yeah, trust.
So you have the acceptance for yourself, and then you have this trust in a deeper intelligence or process that's taking place. Yeah. And I like how you describe that as well. And each of us is individual. I know, like for me doing practice on a daily basis, like I will take, usually most days I spend a good 2 hours doing meditation practice.
Wow.
And I just sit down and just acknowledge whatever is happening in my life. And sometimes it's neutral. There's nothing that's disturbing me or in any way, but even just being present with feelings and sensations, even just bodily sensations are, for instance, something, we all have areas where we tighten up. So like neck and shoulders, or just bringing my awareness into the chest cavity, the heart, lungs, or down into the intestines, because there's a lot of emotion stored in different parts of the body. But in going back to what you had said just a moment ago, there are a lot of instances where someone or something, some interaction is triggering me. And so in that very moment, the fact that I do the sitting practice on my own, it produces, or brings me to a place where there's a higher level of sensitivity. I'm more connected. So when I'm in the moment, interacting with some person or situation, and so right then and there, in that case, I have my eyes open. I'm looking at the person, I'm participating, but I'm aware of those feelings, whatever is being triggered. And so I fully open to what I'm feeling in the moment. And then I just keep breathing as softly and deeply. And there are instances where people have been quite volatile. At times I've reacted, but a lot of times where they're vulnerable, I'm just breathing with my own feelings, my own reactions. And I found that it can, like sympathetic resonance, you strike one tuning fork,
resonance,
and the next one vibrates.
There you go.
And it diffuses the situation. Not always, but in many instances.
No, again, I don't know the hypnotherapy part of it, right? So the way it works is like a kind of energetic resonance that you bring with the other person's energetic body. You first take your resonance to match to the other person's resonance, and then slowly take your resonance, take the other person to match to your energetic resonance, right? And I think that's beautifully what you said, is like when sometimes that happens, there is that energy match that happens. And when you feel kind of relaxed or so, when others around you will also feel relaxed. And when we feel really like, angry and so on, you can feel that the whole energy of that room changes when we feel. And then when we take it down, we become more calm. And so the energy, and I think energy, there is that intelligence, right? That the intelligence of energy that naturally operates without we even having to do anything.
Back to what you said.
Go ahead.
So you were talking again about the frustration, the anger, the rage, these layers, and you were tracing it back through inquiry. What I've found is that, and I see this in other people, I've experienced it myself, where there are these profound disconnects and we don't register a lot of the emotion that operates outside of our conscious awareness. And so a lot of my own practice has been this progressive, like stripping down the layers of armor, the layers of numbness, all this emotional residual, this buildup.
Correct.
And so, and when we went into lockdown from COVID, and it's like, well, what am I going to do? I'm not teaching classes, like, and running back and forth between New York and Boston, making house calls and everything.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to sit for 3 hours a day. And
Wow,
but
nice.
yeah, but the more that I could stay with those feelings, and there were times you mentioned something else too about how we act out our emotions, and before, how I would be attempting to make relationships work, for instance,
There
and
you
some of
go.
those attachments were very unhealthy. And there was this way that sometimes the defense mechanisms would kick me out of the emotions. I would start to
Yeah.
feel, and it would throw me out of there, or I would only feel it to a certain depth.
Yeah.
And I had to teach or train myself to just stay with those emotions. And as I'd keep breathing with them, what I
Yeah.
found is that I would drop into greater depths of the emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes there were layers of feeling that were so horrid, is the best word I could use for
Yeah.
it. It's there's the emotions that are closer to the surface, but there's a lot of that emotional residual that it sits outside of our conscious awareness, and it literally putrefies within
Yeah.
our bodies. And
Yeah.
so when we drop into those areas, and there are a lot of
Yeah.
people will cut and run when they get close to
Yeah.
that because they feel it, it consumes them. But
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
more we can stay present with it, and we digest this,
Yeah.
and especially when we incorporate the interventions, working with
Yeah.
the gifted healer, going through the vision quest, what I
Yes.
find it
Yes.
happens is it transforms, it transmutes this content so that we digest it. It
Yeah.
sift out the waste product, we digest it, the
Yeah.
content's transformed, we
Yeah.
assimilate it.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I
Beautiful.
mentioned, some of the Buddhists, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone or criticize, but
Oh no,
so,
I understand. Yeah.
some of the Buddhist practitioners I've seen, and there was this kind of residual that was still in their body. There was
Yeah.
awareness up here, but there's some of the residual that was still
Yeah.
held in the
Yeah.
body.
There's awareness. Yeah. Beautifully put. There's awareness up here. It's there more on a transcendent basis, but it's not fallen into the body. It's not fallen into the heart, right?
Yeah.
And I think my teacher used to say the extent of your embodiment is shows in the relationships that you have, right? Because ultimately for us as humans, any kind of a relationship, what is our relationship to the world? What's our relationship to the people that we talk to? Again, the compassion, empathy, trust, we can try to develop more from an identity perspective. Like an ego can develop all of these too, and then think it's on the path.
At a
We see that,
superficial
right?
level.
At a very superficial level, right? But
Yeah.
then when you dive into the deeper layers, it naturally, we don't have to practice gratitude, right? We don't have to practice forgiveness, because for me that was a very difficult journey. It's like, how do I practice gratitude when I'm not feeling grateful?
Mm-hmm.
How do I practice forgiveness when I don't want to forgive a person, right? And when you go online and when you see all of these things, people, so you kind of force yourself to practice. How can I let go when I don't want to let go? You see,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a deeper unconscious hold that is holding us there.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very big revelation for me, is the ego can try to do all of these aspects of trying to be good, trying to do the right things, trying to be empathetic, trying to be compassionate, versus the deeper part of it, which naturally is. And when you hit the deeper part, it doesn't mean that the compassion, the way it expresses compassion, is the way that our human minds thinks that is the way to express compassion. Sometimes compassion is getting away from somebody's life, right? And sometimes compassion is being with the person, and who judges what is right. If given to our mind, we will say compassion is maybe when something is going on, you have to be with the person. That's compassion, a traditional mind way of looking at compassion. Sometimes compassion is getting out of the way.
Yeah.
Right? So that intelligence for me won't open up if we are too much hell-bent on techniques and practices. So off late, this is something that I was discussing with my teacher. Can I stop all the techniques for a moment and then see what's going to show up? Every technique. Because at some point in time, again, this is my intuitive way where it is going, is spirituality is just, again, a belief structure. Right? It's a beautiful belief. It's like a deepest belief that we can have. But at some point of time, even that belief structure has to go away. And then there will be some kind of a silence. Silence, not that I'm not talking or so, but a silence, internal silence. That is just life. Like, it's life there. We can call it spiritual, we can call it non-spiritual, we can call it human, we can call it spirit, we can, who cares? Like, if I completely let go of all the techniques, there is nowhere to be than here. You see what I'm saying? There is nothing else present. There is nothing there except this reality that's here. And then ask the question, what's making me not to be here? What am I afraid to feel? Why can't I be here? Lot of things are going to show up at that point of time. Lot of contractions in your body is going to show up. For me, that's how it was. A lot of contraction in my body. No, I can't be here. I need to be doing something. I need to do something. And that's the doer identity. Right? That's one of our identity which formed this body. Like, I need to protect this body. I need to be safe. I need to do certain things. But then when you go to that level, forget every technique, every concept, every belief. Life is so simple. And the intelligence can naturally act itself out without any interference between our belief systems. We can still have all the belief systems because some kind of belief system is needed to interact, to talk, to be in a culture, to follow certain rules. But then we don't hold on to anything. It's a kind of free fall. It's there. Do I have to use this belief? I'll use the belief, but then I'm non-attached to it. I need this, I'll use it, non-attached to it. For me, I think that's one of the recent things that I'm going through with my teacher. I thought I'll just throw it out there, which is no techniques, and then see what shows up. Because then it feels like the nakedness to life, right? Completely naked, no armor, no self-defense mechanism, nothing around you.
Sometimes I wonder a bit too. I was talking about with South Asia, a lot of the people I worked with in that sensitivity and the way that the bodies and minds have a tendency to be fluid, more fluid, as opposed to what I find here in the West. And like we have these certain, what's a constitution. Each individual has a unique constitution, and so again, going back to that fluidity, I tend to operate very intuitively, and I feel what's happening in my body on a day-to-day basis. And I can go into a supermarket and I feel drawn to certain foods. And I feel a lot of that is because certain foods have different nutrients in them, and something in my body is saying, okay, craving certain foods because of their nutrients. And I also, when I look at the produce and I feel it energetically, and I'm feeling like, okay, that's, I feel the difference between non-organic and organic fruits a lot of times. But the training both with the master from China, the internal martial arts, Xing Yiquan Baguazhang, had their roots in Taoism, and also with this Native American doctor. There's definitely the emphasis on doing intensive daily practice. And I think the different, we have different kinds of challenges that we face individually and on a day-to-day basis. So I find it's crucial for me to take that time. As I said, like I'll generally spend about 2 hours a day doing sitting meditation practice. And just being present with all the feelings and sensations. I feel myself digesting these lived experiences, and there's a continual stripping down of these layers that build up and getting closer to the authentic core. And then being like clockwork, the spring and fall going back to do the vision quest. I'll do body work in between, deep tissue body work, and that will help me to, I did that whole 10 series of Rolfing sessions. I went further than that, even additional sessions to keep, and all these different interventions I found help me to strip down. Again, we hold the emotions trapped in different parts of our bodies. And so to break those emotions loose, once they could come into conscious awareness, then I can work in my practice and diffuse them. And then I go back to the mountain again, the vision quest. And each time it's like deepening that connection with the core being. But then there's stepping into day-to-day life. You come back out to the world, and
you go.
As my interactions on a day-to-day level, I feel where I'm contracted. I feel where I'm holding back. I feel any place where I'm not present. So it's like, oh, okay, bring more of me here in the now.
Correct. Bring more of you here in the now, right?
In the now.
That's so when I said no technique, I sit again. I just sit and do nothing. I'm contradicting myself when I said no technique, right? Because the technique is no technique. You see what I'm saying?
That in itself is a technique.
There you go. So the technique is no technique, and how do I define that? Right? It's doing nothing. If the doing nothing meditation. Right? Wherein you said you just sit with yourself, and then you're completely open to what's happening, right? So you're only present. I mean, if you don't do anything, you're naturally present. Even let's say if you don't want to do anything, but then it's not doing anything internally. When we say doing nothing, for me it was doing nothing internally, because internally we have this aspects of, I want to resist certain things, or I want more of something. I want to resist and I want more of things, right? If you don't do that, right, that's the no technique part of it. If you don't do anything, everything is going to start showing up. And if it doesn't show up, life will give you lessons. Life will give you the path wherein it'll obviously show up someday. And then in the meantime, these inquiry practices, wherein you become that whole identity, and then going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And most times that I see, Ben, is two things: fear of getting hurt, fear of not being loved, and fear of dying. Three things. I think mostly it all comes down to that our primordial fears of existing. Those three fears, at least that's what it is mostly that I've experienced with myself, or experienced with certain people that I teach. It's the fear of being not loved, the fear of dying, and the fear of not being safe. I'm just not safe, and I need to do something to be safe.
My favorite inquiry question, in alignment with what you were saying, is that because there's so many ways that we're enacting whatever behaviors or dysfunction. And when I catch myself, or my thoughts are reeling, I'll interrupt it and I'll say, what are the deepest feelings or needs behind all this?
Wow, beautiful. There you go. Yeah. It's all a slight here and there, right? So that for related question for me is, why can't I just be here as is? What do I need to do? Why do I need to do? Or what am I afraid to feel? Or and then when the mind goes somewhere, the question is, am I lost? Oh, did I get lost? And then something just pulls me back. So for me, it is more of a not questions that have helped me than the doing questions, versus I need to be here versus am I lost? And I know it's so subtle. It's so subtle. Am I lost just gets me here. But if I tell myself, be here, then it becomes more of an identity that comes in and tries to be here. You see what I'm saying? It's like an identity that wants to be here. And again, that identity comes up. Versus, am I lost? Then I can be here without an identity. You see what I'm saying? It's just pure presence that is there. So very subtle questions like that will help. Yeah, something similar to what you said.
Yeah, and we need to be careful in terms of asking questions. Like some people ask destructive questions, like "Why am I?" and then they interject, they fill in the blank with some negative. Like if they make a mistake, they'll ask themselves, "Why are they stupid?" or something like that. And the subconscious mind acts like a search engine, like Google, and we'll go searching
all the reasons.
Yeah, we'll hand you like, well, how many reasons do you want? Like 20 or a couple of dozen?
Yeah, it'll give everything that it wants. Yeah, like it'll give everything.
Or when you ask these kind of productive inquiry questions, another thing, examples
so
like I've shown up in places or some interaction and I had no idea how to deal with the person. It's like, okay, what do I need to say to this person? How do I deal with this situation? And I just asked that question with a very focused intent. And I hold it a second. And then I let it go and I just walk right in. But when you get in the practice of engaging your subconscious mind, your subconscious will begin to respond to you. You will develop more of a relationship. And when you're doing the other practices, how I described, and you're dissolving those layers of armor, and your body becomes more fluid, physically, mentally, emotionally. And then there's more of an interactive quality, and you actually dissolve more of the barriers between your conscious and subconscious mind, so that there's more of a fluid exchange of information.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I think we have a lot more to go into. We can do that later on, but we should wrap for now. But is there anything else you want to leave listeners, viewers with as we close for today?
There are more details on my website, sunithasandeep.com, and I teach. It's a 3-month, 90-day program to work with me. It's called as Awake, AWAKE, and in that, I take them through something called as a cured, CURED, cured inquiry process. And each one is an acronym. C stands for we use challenge kind of inquiries. Then we use utility kind of inquiries. Then we use recursive kind of inquiry. So somebody who is kind of new to this whole inquiry process, we take them through certain steps. And each of those CURED is there to release outer layer, then the next inner layer, and so on. So if somebody is interested, they can go onto my website and get more details about me.
And I'll be sure to post that beneath the video. So so just look below, because all these links will be posted so that you can just click on them and it will take you right there. So I'm so happy you joined me, Sunitha, today. And,
thank you so much, Ben. Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was wonderful. Wonderful talking to you. Thank you. And I learned so much from you. Thank you.
I learned so much from you. So I love the exchange here. So love to have you back anytime.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.